Now I have to confess, while you were out, I created two more textures. They're going to be in your source assets, then texture folder, text, and then jet. And they are the smoke texture, has the same amount of tiles, and the gun flash for the muzzles. Before we apply them, let's take a look at a few of the features of the particle system. Now I'm going to be using the same one as I created in the beginning of this course. And I'm going to switch this to texture from wireframe view. Now, from what you see up here, you've got a lot of different modules, as these are called. Now, we'll get started with this course with just a few of these modules, not to get overwhelmed. In a future dynamics course, we can then explore all of these in more detail. With the modules that we'll get started, you can press on the plus here and uncheck Show All Modules, and then you'll just get a few. Worth mentioning that you can actually get a bigger view of this particle system editor, so you don't have to be working out of the inspector. For me, I actually don't use this as much. There is a use for this, but a lot of times I just work from the inspector. But we'll cover a few of these features here just as a proof of concept. Let's go over a few of these settings. The duration parameter specifies what is the length of every single cycle of this particle emitter. For example, if I change this to 2.5 and then stop the effect, uncheck looping so the particle system will not loop, and press simulate, the particle will go on for 2.5 seconds. Changing this back to 5 will give this twice the amount of the emission. This is the length of one cycle. So if I check or uncheck looping, this indicates whether the cycles will loop or whether it actually won't be a cycle because it won't cycle, but it'll just be one period, if you will. Next up is pre-warm. What pre-warm does is that it starts the particle system at the end of one cycle. So for example, if I press stop here, I press pre-warm, and then I simulate, already we are seeing all the particles have already been emitted. Just to show what is the difference, this one starts off from the beginning. Start delay is pretty self-evident. It shows when to actually emit the particles, as this hint tells us. Start lifetime is a kind of a sub-duration. It is what is the lifetime of each single particle. So if this is kind of like the macro duration, this is the micro duration. The length of exactly how long will each particle live. The speed, it will indicate how fast each particle will be. Size will indicate how big it will be, how much you want to rotate it. Start color will indicate the color of each particle, the tint. Gravity multiplier is usually used for things that will require collisions, maybe some debris when you're exploding something. Inherent velocity is if you are moving something and it is emitting a certain effect, such as smoke that we're going to be using. You might want to use this. Simulation local is, or world, the drop down will indicate into which units this is going to be calculating in, either as a child of the particle system or as just a system of particles within the world system. Play on awake just shows when the particle is turned on, should I start it or not, and max particles is how many particles should be emitted. So if there is 1,000 particles already emitted, should I stop using this or should I continue? If it's 1,000, it will wait till all the particles are killed, if they are, and it will not release any particles beforehand. Okay, so there's several of these modules here. I want to show a few of the settings here that covers all of them. Within each setting, you have this little drop down. And it gives us a choice. Curve, random between constants, random between two curves. So let's start off with the curve, and let's start off, for example, with speed. It will be a good obvious example. Now I'm going to check looping, and I'm going to go into speed here. Okay, what we see is a graph editor, and this gives us some presets for the type of graph that we would like to use. So for example, this goes from 0 to 5. I can actually edit this number, 0 to 10. And what does this do? Well, it starts emitting these particles, starting off slow, and then, based on the duration, it will give us a certain speed. So this is not the lifetime of the particle, this is by the duration of each cycle. So it starts up at 0, ends at 10. Now on the x-coordinate of this Cartesian graph, we see that it goes to 5. So this implies duration, as I've said before. If I change the duration here to 10, we will see that this becomes slower, and this will take a longer period to go from 0 to 10. Now, before we go on to any of these other settings, I'd like to continue showing the way that we can specify how we want this change to take place. Going back to this drop-down box here, I'm going to continue on to the next one, which has a random between two constants. This gives me a floating point between the minimum and the maximum here. So if it takes a minimum and a maximum out of 0 and 0, obviously the floating point value will be 0. If I take it a little higher and say go from 0 to 5, some of the particles will have a speed of 0, as we can see here, and the other ones will have a speed of 5. If I continue on, if I choose a random between two curves, automatically we're seeing two of these lines and a red fill in the middle. So in order to specify a round curve, we need to set up more points in this Bezier curve. So if this goes from 0 to 5, both of these curves are actually taking a value between 0 and 5. So in fact, this is going to be the same function as random between two constants. So why use this and not the other? Because we then can specify different parameters to take place during the duration of the particle life. To create a new point, double-click on the line of the Bezier curve. Then you can drag it down or drag it up, and then create more points to either speed up or decrease the speed of each particle. Notice you can do the same thing for the bottom line as well. As we can see here, the particles then speed up right from the very beginning. Now I'm going to back into the drop-down box and just makes things a little simpler, and I'm just going to create a curve and go from this drop-down box here and just go from a linear progression. So the particles are going to go from 0 to 5. Now the size, you can specify things the exact same way. If I take 2, doubles the size, well, and you kind of get the point. The particles get bigger the bigger number you have. Now if I choose to say do a curve, and I can do the same thing, you can see this. You can clearly see that the particles are getting bigger and bigger as they get older, as their life progresses. Start rotation can have the exact same basis, although we won't really see the effect on the textures here because they are, as you can see, Unity provides just basically a uniform circle as the texture. But if we go into the wireframe view, and then select start rotation, and maybe we can just select also the linear curve, we can see that the particles are rotating to this rotation, so 180 degrees as they get older. Let's go back to textured. Start color will be the tint color of each particle. If I started off with blue, actually this time I'll do random between two colors. I'll go for red, and then I'll go to blue. So as we see now, not only do we have red and blue, but we also have violet, and we have all of the colors in between those two values. Gravity multiplier, and here velocity, all of this simulation space, play on awake, we will look at later, and max particles we'll look at once we get started with these other particle modules.